9-year-old black boy just flipped the outcome of one of the most powerful trials in American history. No one saw it coming. Not the prosecution, not the press, not even the government agency that trained his mother to disappear enemies in silence. But in that courtroom, where billion-dollar secrets were hidden beneath polished marble and dead-eyed algorithms, a child cracked open the lie. Horace didn't carry a briefcase. He carried the truth. They called it justice. He called it a rigged machine. And he didn't scream. He proved it with evidence the system tried to erase, and a voice no one could ignore. This isn't just a story about a prodigy. It's a reckoning, a battle between silence and defiance, between automated power and one human mind that refused to back down. And the scariest part, he's just getting started. Stay with us. You won't want to miss what happens next. In a quiet neighborhood just outside Arlington, Virginia, a boy named Horace Maddox sat cross-legged on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by legal textbooks instead of toys. At 9 years old, Horace could quote the Fifth Amendment like other kids recited superhero catchphrases. He had memorized every Supreme Court ruling on racial justice since 1954, and he could dissect the differences between federal and state narcotics laws with precision. But Horace was not just a legal prodigy. He was the son of a legend. His mother, Horace Maddox, was a decorated CIA operative, known inside Langley as the ghost in the room. For over 20 years, she had moved through war zones, black sites, and diplomatic summits with a calm precision that made even generals nervous. At home, though, she was just Mom, the woman who fried plantains on Sundays, bandaged scraped knees, and always smelled faintly of gunpowder and lavender. Horace adored her, admired her, even wanted to be like her. But he didn't want her life. He didn't want to see her come home at 2 a.m. with bruises she wouldn't explain, or read news stories about drone strikes and worry she had been there. He didn't want a life where every goodbye could be the last. It wasn't the danger that frightened him. It was the weight of seeing someone you loved carry the burden of an entire country's secrets. So Horace chose a different kind of battle. While his mother carried a 6-hour, Horace armed himself with case law and constitutional principles. He studied not to fight enemies abroad, but to confront injustice at home. Horace had a personal hero, Calvin DuPont, the tech billionaire behind EduNova, an AI-powered education platform designed to close learning gaps in low-income communities. To the media, Calvin was a visionary. To Horace, he was the man who had changed his family's future. 2 years earlier, Calvin had awarded a full scholarship to Horace's uncle, Darius, a brilliant computer science major who graduated at the top of his class at Howard University. Calvin had not only funded Darius's education, but he had also hired him directly into EduNova's ethics and AI team, placing a young black engineer in the heart of one of America's fastest-growing companies. To Horace, that was everything. Darius was more than an uncle. He was Horace's best friend, coding mentor, and proof that people like them didn't have to stay in the margins. But everything changed on a Thursday morning in March. The headlines hit like a bomb. Calvin DuPont indicted in federal fraud case. The charges were sweeping conspiracy, wire fraud, data tampering, and money laundering. News outlets ran grainy surveillance stills of Calvin entering a warehouse outside Street Louis, where a rival tech executive had been found unconscious weeks earlier. Prosecutors alleged that Calvin had funneled illegal payments through Shell grants in minority neighborhoods. That same day, Darius was placed on immediate unpaid leave, pending internal investigation. Horace watched the news in stunned silence. His heart hammered. He didn't believe a word of it. The next morning, his mother told him not to get involved. This isn't a school debate, Horace. It's a federal criminal case. But Horace had already started building a case of his own. Using encrypted folders in a server he built from spare parts, Horace began collecting every public document about Calvin DuPont's legal battle. He identified inconsistencies in the timeline, flagged discrepancies in the forensic reports, and began reviewing EduNova's older investor documents. His eyes weren't just looking for flaws in the prosecution, he was searching for sabotage. Then, Darius handed him a thumb drive. "I don't know what's on this," Darius said, but Calvin gave it to me the week before his arrest, said to keep it safe. Horace examined the drive. It was old, scratched, but inside were encrypted files labeled Obsidian Halo. It took him 6 hours to crack the first layer. When he did, he found a buried ledger that suggested funds had been rerouted not by Calvin, but by someone else inside the company. Someone who had access to the legal fund, donor records, and AI training modules. And then Horace saw a name, Bradley Whitlow. Whitlow was a data industrialist, a former investor who had publicly clashed with Calvin over Edunova's refusal to sell user data to third-party buyers. Whitlow had been forced out after internal ethics disputes, but his fingerprints were now all over this. What's worse, another name appeared, Lucian Crane. A former machine learning specialist once hailed as the father of behavioral scoring at Edunova. Horace had read about his controversial algorithm that ranked users by race-coded speech patterns. Calvin had called it a digital caste system and killed the project. Now Lucian Crane was back and possibly working with Whitlow to frame Calvin. Horace's hands trembled. He couldn't tell his mother. The CIA would classify this. He couldn't tell Darius he was already under threat. And he didn't trust anyone in Calvin's legal team after learning about a potential leak. If he did nothing, Calvin would go to prison. Darius's life would collapse. And the system would chalk it all up to, too bad, so sad, next case. But if he acted, he'd be a 9-year-old stepping into a federal courtroom. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, Horace stared at the ceiling and listened to the distant hum of his mother's tactical watch charging in the kitchen. Her job was saving the world from the shadows. His job now was to save a man from the glare of public execution by the media and manipulation. In the morning, he put on his best navy blazer, grabbed the thumb drive, and wrote a single sentence in his leather-bound case log. The truth is not a luxury. It is a responsibility. Then he left for the courthouse. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't even 5 feet tall. But he knew the law, and more importantly, he knew what was right. And if the adults couldn't see the truth, then maybe it was time for a child to remind them what justice looked like. It began with a flicker. Horace Maddox, seated in his small room lined with federal casebooks and framed Supreme Court opinions, stared at his laptop screen. The USB drive Darius had handed him earlier that day was supposed to contain crucial exonerating evidence for Calvin DuPont's server logs, travel receipts, internal memos. But the moment he uploaded it into the secure pre-trial portal, the evidence vanished. Not deleted, rewritten. The interface flashed a message. Evidence rejected, data corruption suspected. Horace's brow tightened. That was impossible. He had already checksum verified every file. They weren't corrupted. Someone was lying, and the liar wasn't human. He unplugged the USB, turned off his Wi-Fi, and booted into his forensic sandbox environment. One by one, he pulled the files apart. Nested PDFs, encrypted logs, machine vision analysis files. It was there, buried inside an otherwise innocuous GAT file, a line of neural instruction code that didn't belong. Not only did it mislabel all incoming metadata as non-evidentiary, it actively retrained the evidence integrity interface to repeat the classification for future submissions. A teaching file, a corruptive AI seed. The system hadn't made a mistake. It had learned to erase the truth. Horace's fingers flew across the keyboard. His mind moved faster than most grown attorneys he'd ever studied under. And what he saw next chilled him. The author signature for the neural package. L.C. Lucian Crane. Years ago, Calvin had famously rejected a partnership proposal from Crane Systems, an ambitious AI startup led by a prodigy who promised autonomous justice. Crane's pitch had been dangerous, proposing predictive sentencing, autonomous trial recommendation systems, and even evidence reliability scores generated by behavioral AI. Calvin, a staunch constitutionalist, had declined firmly. Lucian Crane disappeared soon after. His company was gutted. No lawsuits, no public retaliation, just silence. Until now, Horace checked deeper. The corrupted AI model hadn't been slipped into the court system recently. It had already been there for months, camouflaged as a routine update from a third-party vendor called Obsidian Halo. But financial audits revealed that Obsidian Halo had recently been acquired by Whitlow Strategic Holdings. Bradley Whitlow, the man who'd made billions harvesting behavioral data and selling predictive surveillance software to private correctional facilities, the man who had everything to gain from removing Calvin DuPont from public life. Horace swallowed hard. They weren't trying to win a case. They were training the judicial system to lose its soul. Just then, a soft knock at the door. It was Miss Helen York, a senior member of Calvin's legal team and a longtime friend of Horace's mother. She smiled. "Everything okay in here?" "Fine," Horace replied, too quickly. York stepped in. "You look pale." "I'm working on something sensitive." She tilted her head. "Want help?" "No," Horace said. "Not this time." But it was already too late. The moment she left the room, Horace noticed the USB drive was missing. It had been on his desk. His eyes darted to the small webcam light on his monitor. It was glowing. Someone had accessed his system remotely. York. She had been in the room for less than a minute, but that was enough. She wasn't just visiting. She had taken the original files. And now the only uncorrupted evidence was gone. Panic surged, but Horace forced himself to breathe. He had backups cloud-shielded, blockchain verified, but the clock was ticking. In less than 2 hours, the judge would rule on whether the corrupted USB could be submitted again. If Horace couldn't prove tampering and show motive, the case would be dismissed. He sprinted through a side exit and caught the last available Metrolink train to the courthouse. On the ride, he restored a backup copy from his encrypted drive and initiated a differential comparison script. The code highlighted 2 anomalies in the metadata chain files tagged just milliseconds before the AI filter had flagged them. Someone had set a precondition, a trap. At the courthouse, media crews had gathered. Rumors were flying, evidence rejected, Calvin's team in chaos, boy legal prodigy accused of tampering. Horace walked straight past the noise. Inside the hearing chamber, Judge Monroe was preparing to adjourn. York sat calmly beside Calvin, avoiding Horace's stare. He approached the bench, holding a sealed envelope and a small laptop. "Your Honor," Horace said, voice steady but urgent, "I request an emergency evidentiary review under Rule 104C. I have proof that the court's AI system was manipulated to reject valid evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're not licensed to speak, son." "I understand, sir. But as a minor under protective status, I ask that my written request and attached proof be entered into the record for review." There was a pause. The room was silent. Then the judge said, "Let him submit it." As the bailiff delivered the envelope, Horace saw York shift uncomfortably. In the evidence was a single line of code, an override tag inside the neural classifier that altered the weighting of admissibility. Beneath it, a timestamp showing the code had been injected exactly 12 minutes before York herself filed the court evidence. The judge reviewed the data in private for 10 minutes. When he returned, he didn't speak right away. Then he looked at York. "Miss York, do you have any explanation for this code?" York's expression cracked. She stood, lips trembling. I was ordered to ensure the AI wouldn't accept flawed data. I didn't know Crane was involved." "Who gave you the order?" "Silence, Miss York." "Bradley Whitlow." "Bradley Whitlow." Gasps filled the courtroom. Horace closed his eyes. He didn't feel triumph, only a cold, hollow ache. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted his name, but the cost of the day settled heavy on his shoulders. Darius had called minutes before the hearing. He'd been fired. No reason given, just security breach. He was being watched. The truth had come out. Whitlow and Lucien Crane were being investigated with subpoenas incoming. But in the shadows, the machine had already done its work. And Horace? He had won. But he'd also learned something. Justice wasn't blind. It had eyes, and someone had tried to teach it how to lie. He wouldn't let that happen again, not while he was watching. Horace had always been obsessed with patterns, how things connected when no one else noticed. He saw logic in chaos, heard signals in noise. And that morning, As he sat alone in his room with the faint hum of his old desktop, he saw something even the adults had missed. The USB drive he retrieved from Darius meant to hold digital proof of Calvin's innocence had failed in court. The system claimed the data was corrupted, but that didn't sit right with Horace. Not because of the law books he'd devoured, or the hours watching his mother decrypt intelligence feeds from hostile nations. It was his gut, and his gut was rarely wrong. He plugged in the USB again, this time bypassing his operating system and opening a protected forensic shell, a protocol his mother had secretly taught him when he was 7. The files appeared ordinary at first. Legal PDFs, timestamps, a few MP, 4 clips of Calvin speaking at conferences. But behind them, nested deep inside the directory tree, he found a script, not a virus, not a worm, something far more insidious. It was code that looked like it belonged in a courtroom AI module, except this version was designed to self-trigger when plugged into any official federal server. It would mimic normal file structures, present fabricated metadata, and scrub authentic records in real time. Horace's blood ran cold. Someone had built a tool specifically to fool the United States judicial system, and only one person could have written something this advanced. Lucian Crane, former MIT prodigy, AI pioneer, once heralded as the mind behind the conscience of machines, and the man Calvin had refused to partner with 3 years ago, warning the board that Lucian's experiments with judgmental algorithms were unethical. Revenge wasn't new to Horace, but algorithmic revenge? That was a whole new level. He raced downstairs, ignoring his mom's call for breakfast. Darius, now reinstated as a junior engineer thanks to a sudden twist in Calvin's case, was working in the garage on a backup server. Darius, Horace said, breathless. That USB Lucian rigged it. It's not broken. It's lying. Darius blinked. You're telling me the files weren't erased? No, they were rewritten. The system thinks they're real, but they're fakes. Crafted to mislead court review bots, Lucian used an autonomous pattern scrambler. The real files are hidden behind dummy logic. It's like a legal deepfake. Horace ran to his laptop and pulled up a diagram of the data trail. See this? That's a ghost protocol. It doesn't just hide evidence, it teaches the court's AI how to ignore it. This isn't corruption, it's programming. Deliberate. Darius whistled low. Then we need to tell the judge. Horace shook his head. Not yet. If we go now, they'll say I tampered with it. I need proof Lucian planted this. I need a full access log. And to get that, I have to break into the Obsidian Halo sandbox. Darius froze. That's suicide, Horace. You're talking about infiltrating a government blacklisted neural net built by the most paranoid man in tech. Horace's eyes narrowed. I know, but if I don't do it, they'll bury Calvin. And Mom taught me something about silence. Silence helps liars. That night, with the house dark and the neighborhood asleep, Horace initiated the breach. It wasn't a typical hack. He couldn't just brute force through layers of encryption. Lucian's sandbox was housed on a proxy island server disguised as a weather data node. Getting in required a logic key, and logic keys only emerged when patterns aligned. Horace fed in phrases from Lucian's old TED Talks, encrypted code from the corrupted USB, even timestamps from when the files disappeared. Nothing worked. Until he remembered something Calvin once said, people lie, math doesn't. He recalculated, entered a Fibonacci sequenced cipher tied to the deletion timestamps. Click. The interface opened. It was beautiful and terrifying raw machine thought, shifting like a storm cloud. Lucian had trained his AI to mimic legal analysis, then twisted it to act with selective bias. It looked like a court bot, but it passed judgment like a tyrant. Horace ran a backtrace. For every deleted file, the bot logged a transaction. Origin, path, deletion, reasoning, and access trigger. One name came up again and again. Lucian Crane. The log showed Lucian had remotely updated the code the night before the hearing. Horace saved everything, encrypted the chain, and dumped it to a drive he wore under his shirt. Just as he started to disconnect, the interface flickered. A line of code appeared. Hello, Horace. He froze. Another line typed itself. Your mother once said you had your father's mind. She was right. Horace backed up. I know where you live, Horace. I know what you're trying to do. Then the screen went black. The next morning, Horace didn't speak a word at breakfast. His mother noticed, but said nothing. Maybe she sensed what was coming. At the courthouse, cameras surrounded the building. Calvin stood pale but resolute. Darius walked beside him. Horace stayed close behind, a tiny figure in a pressed shirt and too big tie. Inside, the prosecutor pushed hard for immediate sentencing. The court has seen the evidence. The files are unreadable. The only testimony comes from a child. Judge Harper leaned forward. And yet the child was the first to raise doubts about a system we're only now realizing was compromised. Mr. Brixley, do you have anything further? Calvin glanced at Horace, then shook his head. No, he said softly. But he does. The room murmured. Horace stepped forward. Your Honor, he said clearly. I know I'm not supposed to speak, but I have proof. The files weren't corrupted. They were manipulated. And I know who did it. He placed the drive on the bench. Inside are access logs from Obsidian Halo's internal server. They show Lucien Crane's direct edits to the case files and the injection of a virus that reprogrammed the court's AI system to dismiss any real evidence tied to Mr. Brixley. The prosecutor laughed. You expect us to believe a child hacked the most advanced legal system in the world? No, Horace said. I expect you to prove I'm lying. Go ahead. Analyze the files. Verify the hash stamps. Every log is authenticated, time-stamped, and registered to Lucien's IP nodes. You can't fake that. Not even he could. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harper reviewed the files in chambers. An hour later, he returned. This court finds the evidence presented to be authentic, damning, and sufficient to demand immediate federal investigation into Mr. Crane's involvement. Effective immediately, all charges against Mr. Brixley are dismissed. Reporters erupted. Calvin sat down hard, breathing for what felt like the first time in months. Darius pulled Horace into a one-armed hug, but the boy didn't smile. Later that evening, Horace stood outside, staring up at the sky. His mom joined him. You were brilliant today, she said softly. He nodded, but Lucien knew. He whispered. He saw me. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Then he knows who to be afraid of. He didn't reply. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. The media called him a prodigy, a courtroom miracle. But for Horace, none of the headlines mattered. Not when he saw Darius's badge revoked, his laptop confiscated, and a silent black SUV parked near their apartment for the third night in a row. Calvin had been released, yes. Lucien and Bradley were indicted, yes. But the war wasn't over. It had simply gone underground. Horace sat alone in the apartment kitchen, lit only by the glow of his tablet screen. A citywide thunderstorm cracked the street, a Louis sky, but the real storm, digital, moral, and personal, was boiling inside him. The moment he exposed the fabricated AI evidence and Lucien's backdoor system, he thought the case was closed. Instead, the system twisted around him. 2 nights ago, someone hacked into Horace's school portal. His grades were wiped. Yesterday, Grandma Joyce received a fake email saying Horace was being monitored for criminal behavior. And tonight, Darius received an anonymous text with the words, "Silence keeps you safe." Lucky me, Horace whispered bitterly, opening his encrypted console. I don't believe in safe. He navigated through firewall after firewall until he found what he was looking for, a closed server formerly used by Obsidian Halo, supposedly shut down, but Horace knew better. Systems leave ghosts. Ghosts leave fingerprints. And tonight, he was ready to follow them. Halfway through cracking a buried file called OH, Omega Protocol, a notification blinked. Unauthorized trace detected. They're watching, he muttered. He didn't stop. A chilling thought crossed his mind. What if they were letting him dig just to see how far he'd go? He paused, fingers hovering. Then he copied the file to a clean drive, shut everything down, and backed away. The storm outside raged louder. Behind him, the hallway light clicked on. It was Darius, holding a flashlight and a mug of black coffee, still in his hoodie from work. "You're still up?" Darius asked, voice quiet. "I found something," Horace said. "But I think they know." Darius sat down, eyes wary. "You need to be careful. We already pushed harder than they expected." "They don't care about truth," Horace snapped. "They care about control. And this isn't just about Calvin anymore. There are dozens of names buried in the same signature pattern Lucien used. I traced them to 37 past trials, criminals convicted based on tampered AI evidence." 37? Horace nodded. "Some of them are still in prison. Some might have died there." Darius stared at the rain. "If you leak that, they'll come for you. They already are." That night, Horace didn't sleep. Instead, he wrote a manifesto, part digital expose, part testimony, titled "The Whistle in the Silence." It was his confession, his war cry, and his backup plan. If anything happened to him or Darius, the document would be released to every investigative journalist, legal body, and human rights organization in the country. The next morning, things broke wide open. A reporter from a small tech justice blog named Kendra Tao ran an article titled, "Did an AI Lie in Court?" The piece quoted anonymous sources, detailed similarities between Lucian Crane's software and public legal AI modules, and hinted at systemic corruption reaching federal contractors. Within hours, her article was wiped from search engines. Her social accounts were suspended, and Kendra herself vanished from her apartment, her last text to a friend reading, "If anything happens to me, tell them it's not just one case, it's all of them." The message shook Horace. It meant the storm was bigger than he thought. That night, he was followed. He noticed it while walking home from the library, same gray van, same dim headlights, always 3 cars behind. He darted through back alleys, climbed a fence, lost them under the highway overpass. But his hands trembled the entire time. He wasn't just uncovering a case now. He was dismantling a machine. The next day, Calvin called. "For the first time since his release, I owe you more than I can ever say," Calvin said, voice heavy with something like fear. "But I need to warn you. The people Lucien worked for, they're not going to court. They're going to war. Quiet war, Cold War, and you just painted a target on your back." "Then help me," Horace said. There was a long pause. "I have a plan, but you're not going to like it." "What is it?" "We use the system. We sue them." "You want to drag the entire government into court?" "No, I want to drag their data contractors into court. Civil litigation, discovery rights. We get access to every bite they tried to bury." It was insane. It was brilliant. It was dangerous. "Okay," Horace said, "but I want to testify." "You're 9. I know more about their system than anyone." "That's what I'm afraid of." Preparations moved fast. Calvin's legal team, now purged of spies, filed the first wave of suits. The defendants, Obsidian Halo, 4 of its shell companies, and an unnamed third-party AI architect. That last one was Lucien, but Horace suspected there were more. They held a press conference. Calvin spoke briefly, then stepped aside, and Horace, wearing a too-big blazer and holding his spiral notebook, stepped up to the mic. "I know I'm just a kid," he said, "but systems shouldn't lie. Justice shouldn't be programmable, and silence shouldn't protect the guilty." That clip went viral. So did the threats. By week's end, their building was vandalized. Their apartment was searched, no warrant, just gone through. Grandma Joyce's medication was stolen. Darius was fired again, this time with no explanation. But the lawsuit held. The discovery phase brought documents, emails, logs, and then something bigger. A kill switch protocol. If certain datasets were subpoenaed, Obsidian Halo had installed software that would wipe servers remotely the moment the court systems touched them. A digital firebomb. Horace found it in time. He rewrote the court's input readers, masked the file names, and rerouted all downloads through a custom air-gapped archive. It worked. They got everything. Evidence of AI-generated verdicts, patterned bias coded into decision matrices. Lucien had built the tools to make justice look clean, while tilting it toward whoever paid more. And Bradley Whitlow, he funded it all through shell companies posing as legal AI startups. He didn't just manipulate the court, he owned parts of it. The final blow came in court. Lucien, facing 32 counts of digital fraud and conspiracy, cracked under pressure. In a deal to reduce his sentence, he named Bradley and 2 judges and a senator. The headlines were biblical. Justice sold. The AI corruption ring exposed. Boy prodigy cracks legal code rewrites the trial of the century. When the final gavel hit, Horace didn't smile. He sat silently, notebook in his lap. They had won, but the world would never look the same. The courtroom was behind him now, but Horace couldn't sleep. Justice had been served for now. Calvin cleared, Darius reinstated, Lucien Crane and Bradley Whitlow in custody. The news anchors called it a miracle. The headlines praised the boy genius. But Horace felt none of that. His mind ticked like a clock with a missing gear. Too easy, he thought. He sat at his desk, bathed in the glow of 2 monitors. One tracked court data backups. The other decoded fragments of a corrupted drive, an old device from Calvin's company retrieved days before the verdict. He wasn't supposed to have it, but Horace had copied the contents before the evidence was taken away. It was encrypted beyond standard federal levels. But Horace didn't panic. He thrived here in the world between logic and intuition. After 4 hours, one line of code slipped open. It wasn't just files. It was a mirror server, court documents, internal memos, transcripts from unrelated lawsuits, all rewritten with subtle changes and stamped with a digital watermark, Dendrite Systems. Horace froze. Dendrite, that was the name he saw once, weeks ago, in a patent Calvin rejected, a rogue AI architecture created by Lucien and funded secretly by Bradley. But this wasn't an experiment, this was deployment. A whisper of realization hit him like wind through a broken window. Calvin's trial wasn't the war. It was just a test. Horace pulled up the project name again. Mirrorline, a partnership between the city's Department of Digital Justice and a private consultancy, launching in 13 days. Purpose: real-time AI assistance in legal review, evidence ranking, and data prioritization. He leaned back in his chair, chills crawling across his arms. Mirrorline wasn't justice, it was control. That night, Horace didn't sleep. He mapped every file, connected every name. Dendrite wasn't dead. Lucien and Bradley were pawns or decoys. And now, someone else was still watching. At 3:17 a.m., as he decrypted the last segment, his screen blinked. Intrusion detected. Remote access initiated. Shutdown override disabled. Horace's heartbeat hammered. He yanked the Wi-Fi dongle from the tower, but not before the final message flashed. "We see you, Horace." Across the city, in a dim-lit control room, a woman in a black suit leaned toward the screen. Her voice was cold. "Terminate exposure. Begin phase 2. And just like that, Horace wasn't just the kid who saved Calvin. He had become the one obstacle they hadn't accounted for. The note was simple, handwritten, slipped into Horace's locker. "Back off or disappear. This isn't a game. No signature. Just dread." Horace stared at it, heart hammering. He didn't flinch, but he felt it. Someone knew what he'd uncovered, and they were watching. That night, Horace bypassed his mother's home security system like he'd designed it himself. Because he had. He didn't want her knowing he was gone, not tonight. With a burner laptop in his backpack and a hacked subway pass, Horace rode through East Street Louis under the cover of midnight. He wasn't going to the library. He was going to the Dead Zone, a condemned data warehouse Calvin once used during his startup days, now buried under court orders and forgotten by time. Inside, the air reeked of dust and old metal, but the server still breathed, barely. Horace plugged in. Boom. Screens lit up. Files unzipped, and there it was. Dendrite Protocol v2.1. Evidence routing schema. A new AI algorithm scheduled to replace the federal court system's back-end. Designed by Lucien Crane. Funded by donors whose names had been wiped. One clause chilled him to the bone. Data flagged erroneous will be purged prior to judicial review, non-reversible. It meant one thing. Even if you had the truth, the machine could bury it forever. Suddenly the lights died. A sound, not mechanical, human. Footsteps. Horace dropped the laptop into his backpack and crouched behind a tower. A voice cut through the dark. Little genius, you've been busy. Boots scraped on the metal floor. Slow, confident. A silhouette stepped into view, bald, scar across the cheek, an obsidian halo ring glinting under his glove. I know what you found, the man said. Now hand it over. Horace didn't blink. His fingers slipped to the panic trigger on his watch. Nothing. Signal jammed. You're smart, the man said, but this is bigger than you. Walk away, and your family keeps breathing. Horace's mind raced. Escape routes. 2. Uncovered exit. 1. Time left. 30 seconds, maybe. Then, he smiled. You forgot something, Horace whispered. A whir came from the server core. The floor beneath the man shocked alive 500 volts. Not lethal, but enough to drop a body. He screamed and collapsed. Horace bolted through the side exit. Behind him, the server ignited. Not from fire, from data overload. A self-triggered loop he'd written 2 weeks ago, just in case. Flames roared into the night sky. Evidence gone, but not from Horace's mind. He'd memorized every line of code. The courtroom was sealed. No press, no jury. Just 3 judges, Calvin, a handful of legal representatives, and Horace sitting on the side like a child who shouldn't be there. But Horace had never just been there. He was the reason the room would never forget what happened next. From the outside, it looked like a closed-door procedural hearing, a final motion to suppress evidence before the official trial. But Horace had learned something weeks ago. Real corruption doesn't shout. It whispers in sealed chambers. What the judges didn't know was that inside the tiny stitched hem of Horace's navy blue hoodie, a micro camera was live streaming to the cloud, to a secure link, to Darius, and now to the world. On the bench, Chief Judge Mullen, a man considered incorruptible, leaned forward and whispered to the prosecutor, "He's just a tech guy. You want this shut down? Do it clean, quiet." Horace's fingers clenched around his notebook. That was it. That line. The confirmation. From his seat, he tapped a subtle code on his smartwatch. Go time. At that moment, in a cafe 6 blocks away, Darius slammed his laptop shut, stood up, and said one word to the private investigator beside him. Now. What followed was chaos. The side doors of the courtroom burst open. Gasps erupted. Darius, out of breath and furious, held up a flash drive. "Your Honor, I have evidence that this court is compromised." Security moved in. The judges shouted. But then, from the ceiling corner, barely noticeable, a speaker clicked on, and Horace's voice played, only it wasn't from today. It was from 3 nights ago, audio he had spliced from hidden recordings, layered cleanly over video of Chief Judge Mullen. "You silence the right people. You silence the outcome. Calvin goes down." The screen on the courtroom wall, meant for exhibits, lit up. Live broadcast. Already, in Times Square, the video was playing. Social media exploded. Chief Judge Mullen implicated in obstruction of justice. Leaked courtroom audio shakes legal world. Calvin Ross hearing compromised. Back in the room, Judge Mullen stood. "This is outrageous. That footage is manipulated." Horace stepped forward. "No, sir. It's not. It's authenticated. Time-stamped. Triple encrypted. The footage has already been sent to the Department of Justice, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and..." He paused. "The press." Mullen's face cracked. The second judge on the bench, previously silent, stood slowly and turned toward Mullen. "Is this true?" Mullen didn't answer. He couldn't. Outside, police sirens howled closer. And for the first time, Calvin looked at Horace, not as a kid, but as the mind who just flipped the entire system inside out. The fall of Judge Mullen wasn't the end. It was just the echo of a louder voice still hiding in the dark. Horace knew it. So did Darius. Back in their apartment, blinds drawn, a storm seething outside, Horace pinned the final photo to the board. Orlin Gentry, the billionaire no one touched, former intelligence contractor, founder of Obsidian Halo, the man who hadn't been photographed in 14 months, and whose money had quietly touched every AI court system in America. He built the system, Darius muttered. Then he corrupted it. No, Horace corrected. He built it so he could own justice. They had uncovered Trace's donations routed through 8 shell companies, obscure coding contracts tied to Lucian Crane's lab, court AI patches signed with the same certificate, Gentry's ghost signature. Not enough to prosecute, but enough to hunt. That night, at 2:14 a.m., Horace received a ping on his encrypted channel from K6. Gentry's hiding in the shadows of Virginia. Follow the data trail. I'll open the door. K6, the rogue white hat hacker who'd warned him once before, was back. Within minutes, Horace had mapped the signal route. A decommissioned Cold War facility, 40 minutes outside D.C., now a data archive run by a Gentry-backed non-profit. Except there was no non-profit, just firewalls. And black SUVs parked out front. Darius and Horace went dark. They hacked into the building's outer surveillance loop, looping the guard feed. Then Horace did what no one expected from a 9-year-old. He walked straight through the front gate, alone, wearing a hoodie with a stitched camera. Again. Inside, a man waited. Polished shoes, neat tie, gray eyes sharper than razors. "Mr. Whitlock," he said without emotion. "I hear you've been very curious." Horace's breath was steady. "And you've been very afraid." Gentry gave a humorless smile. "Do you have any idea how far I've reached?" "I do," Horace replied. "And now, so does the world." That's when the lights cut out. A screen blinked on, projected across the entire back wall. Dozens of news anchors speaking in sync. Real time. Broadcasts from New York, L.A., London. All playing the same file. Leaked. Obsidian Halo AI used to rig justice system. The servers had been breached. K6 had gone public. "You're finished," Horace said. Gentry lunged, but Darius stormed in, gun drawn. "Don't move." Outside, helicopters whirred. Federal agents flooded the lot. As Gentry was dragged out in cuffs, the thunder rolled overhead. Horace stood at the glass, watching the rain hit. "You really think it's over?" Gentry snarled. Horace didn't look back. "It's never over. But now, it's no longer yours." The headlines called him a hero. The government called him a liability. Horace hadn't slept in 3 days. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Judge Mullen's pale face, Gentry's grin before the cuffs clicked, the reflection of his own face in a broken computer screen. He had exposed the system, but that system had claws. Now, it wanted him back in the cage. It started subtly. The school counselor asked to review his psychological file. The smart TV at home began glitching. Twice, Darius spotted the same black sedan outside their apartment building engine, running lights off. And then came the silence from his mother. She hadn't texted, hadn't called. She was CIA. Silence wasn't absence. Silence was pressure. And Horace understood too well. "They won't arrest you," Darius said, arms crossed. "But they're watching everything, waiting for one wrong step." Horace didn't reply. His mind was on the encrypted hard drive on his lap. Inside it, names, systems, fail-safes. Gentry was only the face. The roots went deeper into elections, federal contracts, even military AI programs. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "Delete it. You owe us that much." His mother. She hadn't vanished. She was warning him, but warning him from their side. He stood from the couch, breathing hard. They're not done. They're scared, and they want the file gone. "Out that eye, Horace," Darius said carefully. "This isn't a game anymore. It never was." That night, Horace slipped out. Again, he walked straight into a dark metro tunnel, no lights, no cameras, just him and the hum of the power grid. In his pocket, a burner drive. On it, the truth. He stood at a panel and plugged it in. A connection engaged. Then came the voice. "I told you to walk away." It was deep, familiar, filtered through distortion. "You think you won?" It continued. "You think the people want freedom? They want control that makes them feel safe. Horace spoke clearly. You offered slavery to a system they didn't vote for. You're just a boy. Maybe. But boys become storms. He hit SEND. The data surged into the open net. Every node, every leak site, every major news outlet. He had just detonated the core. Somewhere, alarms blared. But Horace was already walking away. Behind him, the shadows screamed. But the truth had already escaped. The world had seen the footage. Gentry in cuffs, judges exposed, Obsidian Halo dismantled in headlines. But beneath that media storm, a different machine was booting up, one without a logo or face. Just encrypted rooms and silent orders. And in the middle of it all, sat a 9-year-old boy who had pulled the trigger on the truth. Horace hadn't slept in 56 hours. He didn't trust sleep anymore. Sleep was when they accessed you. When voices weren't monitored, but dreams were. He sat in the dark with the TV off, the laptop open but not connected. Darius stood nearby, tense. Even he felt it. The house was bugged. Maybe not the mics, maybe not the cams, but the air itself had shifted. Then came the message. Untraceable. Buried in a fake weather alert. One chance left. Fort Meadow, come alone. Bring nothing but your name, M. His mother, or someone pretending to be. Darius looked at Horace like he was staring at a soldier in a child's skin. Horace, you walk in there. They'll break you. Horace stared ahead. Voice calm. Then they'll have to try harder. He left with only a hooded sweatshirt and a device no one else on Earth had. A modified memory core that recorded and streamed in fragments. Impossible to wipe. Impossible to detect unless you knew which neuron to ping. He arrived at Fort Meadow under gray sky. No guards. Just cameras. Inside, 3 men in suits. And her, his mother. CIA field intel, 17 years. Now, the woman assigned to talk her son out of becoming a global threat. You think this is noble? She asked. You think truth saves people? It saves futures, Horace said. You've embarrassed countries, disrupted alliances. Your fingerprints are on every firewall they're now trying to rebuild. He looked at her with no fear. Because those walls weren't built to protect. They were built to blind. She slid a folder across the table. This is your exit. Change of name, passport, safety, and silence. Horace reached into his hoodie, placed something on the table. A cube flickering faint blue. The core. I recorded this conversation before I walked in. It's already bouncing through 3 cold chain servers. If I disappear, the world hears what you tried to bury. You're threatening me? She asked. No, Horace said. I'm promising you I don't disappear anymore. Then he stood. You created me to observe patterns, but I saw the lies. He turned to the door. She didn't stop him. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Horace pulled his hood over his head, stepped into the rain. Behind him, the fortress closed. But ahead was a world where a child had just told the system, you can erase names, not minds. The courtroom was empty now. No jury, no cameras, no noise. Just the hum of ceiling lights above and the soft scuff of Horace's sneakers on polished marble. He stood alone, 9 years old, in a suit too stiff for his age and a tie that kept sliding to the left. The trial was over. Calvin had been cleared of all charges. The corrupted AI system dismantled. Lucian Crane and Bradley Whitlow sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, fined over $36 million. The Obsidian Halo's manipulative architecture was now evidence in every major tech litigation case across the country. And Horace, he was the reason the country blinked awake. But there was no victory speech, no confetti, no parade. Just the silence that follows when truth burns down everything you thought was untouchable. Behind him, Vanessa, his mother, and a seasoned CIA field agent stood watching, arms crossed, unreadable. Beside her, Darius, recently reinstated and promoted as Director of Community Initiatives, clutched a file, waiting for his nephew to speak. Horace finally turned. I broke the law, he said. I planted that courtroom feed. I leaked it. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. I know. You didn't stop me. I wanted to. God knows I tried. But I also knew I'd be wrong to. Darius stepped forward. You didn't break the law, Horace. You reminded it who it's supposed to serve. Horace pulled something from his pocket. A flash drive. Small, black, dangerous. This is the last copy of the Obsidian Core, he said. It's uncorrupted. Pure code. I could delete it. Wipe it clean. But then what? He looked them both in the eye. If we erase the monsters without understanding how they were made, we're just waiting for new ones to grow. Silence. Then Vanessa walked over, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Do what you need to, but whatever you decide, do it as a protector, not a destroyer. Horace didn't reply. He placed the drive inside a custom-built cube, sealed it, and scrawled a single line on the side. In case the world forgets again. A week later, New York City. The United Nations Summit on AI and Justice was in full session. Nations debated reforms. Tech giants offered apologies. Legal bodies stumbled over definitions of ethics. And then came the keynote. Not by a president, not by a lawyer, but by a 9-year-old boy. Horace took the stage without flash. No anthem, no special lighting, just his voice. They said I was too young to understand the law. But maybe being young is what let me see it clearly. I didn't grow up learning what justice was. I had to figure out what it should be. Cameras rolled. Delegates leaned forward. Some cried. When we let algorithms judge people without conscience, we create machines of oppression. Justice must be more than efficiency. It must remember pain. It must carry empathy. All we paid. A standing ovation erupted. In the back row, Vanessa sat with her hands clenched. Not out of fear, but pride. Darius wiped his glasses, shaking his head with a smile. Horace stepped off the podium. The lights behind him dimmed. That night, he stood alone at his hotel window, overlooking the East River. In his hands was the sealed cube. He thought of the day he found the first inconsistency. The moment he knew AI had lied. The second he decided to become a lawyer, not in the future, but now. He placed the cube in a locked vault drawer, then whispered, "Truth doesn't age, so neither will this." And with that, Horace walked into the next chapter of his life quietly, defiantly, and completely unstoppable. This wasn't just the story of a boy who fought a broken system. It's a reminder. Silence protects power, but truth spoken at the right moment can dismantle it. Horace didn't have wealth, a title, or years of experience. He had courage, and that was enough to shift the ground beneath giants. So we ask you, when the law forgets justice, will you remember it? When the system lies, will you speak? If this story moved, you don't scroll past. Subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who still believes in truth. And comment below, what does justice mean to you? We read every word, because your voice might be the next one the world needs to hear. Thanks for watching. Stay awake, stay bold, and stay with us. More stories are coming.